Earth's oxygen dwindled at a terrifying pace, asphyxiating millions, as a ruthless alien race known as the Andorians ravaged the planet's atmosphere. Dr. Ryan Evans, the brilliant astrophysicist who first detected the crisis, stood before the United Nations, his voice trembling with urgency. "We face an existential threat, unlike any in human history," he declared. "The Andorians have stolen our most precious resource, the very air we breathe. Without swift action, Earth will soon become a lifeless husk." As panic spread and societies teetered on the brink of collapse, world leaders united behind a daring plan to construct a formidable fleet of dreadnoughts and launch a counterstrike against the Andorians. The survival of humanity hinged on reclaiming the stolen oxygen and defeating the alien menace. In secret underground facilities, teams of engineers and scientists worked feverishly to design and build the mighty warships. The dreadnoughts were marvels of human ingenuity and determination, bristling with advanced weapons and shielded against the perils of deep space. Admiral Nathaniel Vance, a battle-hardened veteran with a tragic past, was tasked with leading the fleet into the unknown. Meanwhile, Dr. Evans assembled a crack team of experts to develop the cutting-edge technology needed to locate and engage the Andorians. Among them was the brilliant but controversial xenobiologist Dr. Lena Sorensen, whose radical theories on interspecies communication held the key to understanding their enigmatic foe. As the dreadnoughts neared completion and the oxygen crisis deepened, tensions mounted between the military and scientific factions. Admiral Vance pushed for an immediate all-out assault, while Dr. Evans advocated caution and further study of the aliens. With crops withering and ecosystems collapsing, the pressure to act grew by the hour. On the eve of the fleet's departure, a chilling message from the Andorian leader Grus shattered any remaining doubts about the aliens' intentions. Earth faced a stark choice: total surrender or annihilation. In a defiant display of unity, humanity chose to fight. The dreadnoughts blasted off, hurtling toward a confrontation that would echo through the ages, a battle for the very right to breathe, to exist. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance as the fleet raced across the stars, carrying with it the last hope of a species on the brink. As the dreadnought fleet hurtled through the void, the weight of their monumental task settled heavily upon the crew. Captain Marcus Hastings, a battle-scarred veteran with haunted eyes, assumed command of the flagship, the U.S. Deliverance. He assembled a crew of unparalleled skill and courage. Latour's commander Akira Tanaka, a brilliant engineer and steadfast friend, and Lieutenant Liam O'Brien, an eccentric yet gifted navigator. In the bowels of the Deliverance, Dr. Evans and Dr. Sorensen toiled tirelessly in the research labs, poring over scant data on the enigmatic Andorians. The military's fixation on firepower and combat readiness chafed against their quest for knowledge, a simmering tension that threatened to boil over. As the fleet approached the solar system's edge, the first signs of Andorian cunning emerged, a vast cloaked minefield barring their path. The dreadnoughts' sensors, marvels of human ingenuity, detected the deadly snare at the last possible moment. The ships wove through the field with heart-stopping precision, the USS Deliverance narrowly evading destruction thanks to Lieutenant O'Brien's preternatural reflexes. Emerging from the treacherous passage, the fleet confronted a wall of Andorian warships, their alien weaponry glinting menacingly in the starlight. Captain Hastings steeled himself, preparing to order the attack, when a hailing frequency crackled to life. The visage of Grus, the Andorian commander, filled the view screen, his second-in-command Zara a striking presence at his side. Grus's ultimatum hung in the air like a blade: surrender or face annihilation. With a gesture, he targeted a nearby moon, a lifeless orb suspended in the void. A beam of searing energy lanced out, and the moon vanished in a blinding flash, reduced to dust and echoes. The dreadnoughts, for all their might, suddenly seemed fragile, vulnerable. Captain Hastings, mind-racing, stalled for time, engaging Grus in a tense verbal dance as Dr. Evans and Dr. Sorensen raced against the clock, desperately analyzing the weapon's energy signature. As negotiations teetered on the brink of collapse, and the Andorian flagship thrummed with building power, Dr. Evans burst onto the bridge, eyes alight with desperate hope. The weapon, he revealed, required an immense power surge, leaving the Andorian ships briefly vulnerable after firing. Captain Hastings seized the fleeting chance, commanding the fleet to focus their fury on the flagship's pulsing core. The gamble paid off in a cascading series of explosions, the Andorian flagship reeling as its power core ruptured. The Dreadnoughts surged forward, guns blazing, tearing into the disarrayed enemy with merciless efficiency. The Andorian fleet, once an impenetrable wall, shattered like glass, fleeing towards their distant homeworld. As the Dreadnoughts prepared to give chase, a faint distress signal caught Dr. Sorensen's attention, emanating from a crippled Andorian vessel. Captain Hastings, ignoring Admiral Vance's protests, ordered a rescue mission, a chance to glean precious intel. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka led the away team, breaching the alien hull to discover a grievously wounded Zara, her revelations sending shockwaves through the human crew. The Andorians, she gasped through bloodied lips, were not conquerors, but survivors, their own world teetering on the brink of collapse. Their theft of Earth's oxygen was an act not of aggression, but of desperation, a final, frantic attempt to save their species. As the Dreadnoughts closed in on the Andorian homeworld, the human leaders found themselves divided, wrestling with the implications of Zara's confession. Some, like the hawkish Admiral Vance, saw only an enemy to be crushed, their crimes unforgivable. But others, led by the scientists who had long sought to understand the Andorians, glimpsed an opportunity for diplomacy, a chance to forge an unlikely alliance in the face of mutual destruction. Captain Hastings, the weight of two worlds on his shoulders, faced an impossible choice as the Andorian homeworld loomed before them, a choice that would echo through the ages and shape the destiny of two civilizations on the brink of oblivion. Captain Hastings stared at the Andorian homeworld looming before them, its once vibrant atmosphere now a sickly haze. The bridge of the USS Deliverance crackled with tension as the crew awaited his decision. "We can't just obliterate them," Dr. Sorensen argued, her eyes blazing. "They're desperate, not evil. There has to be another way." Admiral Vance's hologram flickered, his face hardened. "Every moment we hesitate puts Earth at greater risk. We must strike now, while we have the advantage." Hastings felt the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, his mind racing through possibilities. "We'll do both," he announced, silencing the debate. "Admiral, take the bulk of the fleet and prepare for a potential assault. I'll lead a diplomatic mission with the Deliverance." As the fleet split, Hastings turned to his crew. "This is our one shot at averting catastrophe. Let's make it count." The Deliverance approached the Andorian world, weapons primed but a message of peace broadcasting on all frequencies. Tense minutes passed before a response crackled through. "This is High Commander Gruss. We will receive a small delegation. Any signs of hostility will be met with immediate force." Hastings, Sorensen, and a small team materialized in the heart of the Andorian capital. The air was thin, acrid, burning their lungs. Once grand structures crumbled around them, testament to a civilization in decline. In the council chamber, they faced Gruss. The Andorian leader's proud bearing belied the desperation in his eyes. "You've seen our plight," Gruss began. "Our world dies. The oxygen from Earth was our last hope." "We understand your desperation," Hastings replied, "but we can't sacrifice our planet to save yours. Perhaps we can find a solution that benefits both our peoples." As they debated, a fragile trust began to form. Gruss proposed an alliance to find a sustainable solution. Hastings countered with an offer to help terraform a new Andorian homeworld. Just as a breakthrough seemed within reach, the chamber shook violently. Alarms blared as view screens showed Admiral Vance's fleet launching a surprise attack. "Treachery!" Gruss roared, reaching for a weapon. "This wasn't the plan!" Hastings shouted, ducking for cover as chaos erupted around them. He slapped his communicator. "Deliverance, emergency beam out now!" The human delegation materialized on their ship, leaving behind a stunned and enraged Gruss. Outside, the skies erupted in furious battle, human and Andorian ships clashing in a deadly dance. On the bridge of the Deliverance, alarms blared and crew members shouted status reports. Hastings gripped his chair, watching the conflict unfold with a sinking heart. "Sir, what are your orders?" Lieutenant O'Brien asked, his hands poised over the helm controls. Hastings looked from the raging battle to Dr. Sorensen's pleading eyes, then back to the view screen where Admiral Vance's ships pressed their attack. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, and the next decision would shape the course of history. Captain Hastings' grip tightened on the arms of his chair as he watched Admiral Vance's fleet unleash a barrage of fire upon the Andorian capital. The bridge of the Deliverance erupted into chaos, crew members shouting status reports as the ship rocked from the shock waves of distant explosions. "Sir, what are your orders?" Lieutenant O'Brien's voice cut through the din, his hands hovering over the helm controls. Hastings met Dr. Sorensen's pleading gaze, then turned back to the view screen. The decision before him was impossible, yet inaction would doom both species. "Shields up! Weapons online!" Hastings commanded, his voice steely. "We're stopping this attack." The Deliverance surged forward, inserting itself between Vance's fleet and the Andorian defenses. Hastings opened a channel to all ships. "This is Captain Hastings of the USS Deliverance. Admiral Vance, stand down immediately. This attack is unauthorized and risks destroying any chance for peace." Vance's face appeared on screen, contorted with rage. "You dare defy my orders, Hastings? You'll hang for this treason." "Better to hang than to massacre an entire civilization," Hastings retorted, cutting the transmission. He turned to his tactical officer. "Target Vance's lead ships. Disable their engines and weapons arrays." The Deliverance unleashed a precise volley of fire, methodically crippling the human fleet's vanguard. On the Andorian side, High Commander Gruss watched in stunned disbelief as the human ship defended his forces. "Sir," Dr. Sorensen called out, "I've established communication with Gruss. He's agreed to a temporary ceasefire if we can neutralize Vance's fleet." Hastings nodded grimly. "Then let's end this quickly." The Deliverance dove into the heart of the human armada, weaving between friendly fire as it systematically disabled ship after ship. Hastings' intimate knowledge of human tactics allowed him to anticipate and counter each of Vance's moves. Finally, only Vance's flagship remained operational. The two ships faced off, trading devastating blows that rocked their hulls and sent cascades of sparks erupting from overloaded systems. "One more hit should do it," Lieutenant Commander Tanaka reported from engineering, her voice strained. "But our own systems are critical. We can't take much more of this." "Plot a course directly for their starboard weapons array," Hastings ordered O'Brien. "All power to forward shields and phasers." The Deliverance surged forward in a final desperate charge. Vance's flagship unleashed everything it had, but Hastings' gambit paid off. A pinpoint phaser strike ruptured the enemy ship's primary power conduits, leaving it adrift and powerless. As an eerie calm settled over the battlefield, alarms began blaring throughout the Deliverance. "Captain!" Sorensen cried out, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at her console. "The oxygen reserves, they've ignited in the Andorian atmosphere. It's creating a firestorm unlike anything we've ever seen." Hastings watched in dismay as the surface of the Andorian homeworld began to glow an angry red, the apocalyptic inferno spreading with terrifying speed. "We have to do something," Sorensen pleaded, "or both our species are doomed." Hastings' mind raced, considering and discarding options until a desperate plan formed. "The warp drive," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can use it to open an artificial wormhole, siphon off the firestorm." "Sir, that's never been attempted," Tanaka protested. "The risks are less than certain annihilation," Hastings cut her off. He opened a channel to Gruss, quickly explaining the plan. The Andorian leader's face was grim. "We have no choice. Proceed." As the Deliverance maneuvered into position, Hastings felt the weight of two civilizations pressing down upon him. "Divert all power to the warp drive," he ordered. "Prepare to initialize on my mark." The ship groaned and shuddered as its engines strained beyond their design limits. On the display, the raging inferno grew ever closer. "Now!" Hastings shouted. A blinding flash erupted before them as reality itself seemed to tear open. For a breathless moment, it appeared to be working. The firestorm began to funnel into the artificial wormhole. Then everything went wrong. The wormhole destabilized, collapsing in on itself with a thunderous roar. A massive ion shockwave slammed into the Deliverance, sending the ship tumbling end over end as systems failed across the board. Through the chaos on the bridge, Hastings watched in horror as the shockwave struck the Andorian homeworld. The planet's surface buckled and heaved, great fissures opening to spew forth molten rock. As the crew of the Deliverance struggled to regain control of their crippled vessel, a new threat emerged. Several human dreadnoughts, their systems apparently shielded from the ion blast, powered up their weapons. "This is Colonel Davenport," a cold voice announced over the comm system. "We're taking control of this situation. Prepare to witness the end of the Andorian threat." Hastings stared at the viewscreen in disbelief, watching helplessly as the rogue human ships began their assault on the dying Andorian world. Hastings' eyes narrowed as he watched Davenport's ships bearing down on the vulnerable Andorian homeworld. He turned to his battered crew, purpose etched on their faces. "We have one shot at this," he said, his voice firm. "Dr. Sorensen, take our science vessels and evacuate as many Andorians as you can. I'll deal with Davenport." Sorensen nodded, her face grim. "What about Zara?" "She goes with you," Hastings replied. "Her knowledge of Andoria will be crucial." As Sorensen's team scrambled to the shuttle bay, Hastings gripped the arms of his chair. "Helm, set an intercept course for Davenport's lead ship. Weapons, target their engines and weapon systems. We're ending this now." The Deliverance surged forward, its hull groaning under the strain. On the interface, Davenport's dreadnoughts loomed larger, their weapons ports glowing with deadly energy. "Sir, they're locking weapons," Lieutenant O'Brien called out. "Evasive pattern Delta," Hastings ordered. "Return fire." The ship lurched as it dodged a barrage of torpedoes. Hastings felt the deck shudder beneath his feet as the Deliverance's phasers lashed out, scoring hits along the lead dreadnought's hull. Meanwhile, Sorensen's makeshift fleet dove into Andoria's turbulent atmosphere. The planet's surface was a hellscape of fire and ash, great fissures spewing molten rock into the sky. "There!" Zara shouted, pointing to a cluster of structures barely visible through the smoke. "That's the capital shelter complex." Sorensen nodded, keying her comms. "All ships, focus on these coordinates. We need to work fast." As the science vessels touched down, crowds of panicked Andorians swarmed towards them. Sorensen's team worked feverishly, guiding refugees aboard while dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. Back in orbit, the Deliverance was taking a beating. Sparks showered from overloaded consoles as the ship shuddered under Davenport's relentless assault. "Shields down to 20%, Tanaka reported from her engineering station. "We can't take much more of this." Hastings's mind raced. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but he refused to let Davenport win. An idea struck him. Risky, possibly suicidal, but their only chance. "Helm, full impulse towards Davenport's flagship," he ordered. "On my mark, cut engines and rotate us 180 degrees. "Sir?" O'Brien's eyes widened in realization. "You can't mean—" "That's exactly what I mean, Lieutenant. Get ready." The Deliverance rocketed towards Davenport's ship, weapons blazing. At the last possible second, Hastings shouted, "Now!" The ship's engines cut out. For a heart-stopping moment, they drifted in space. Then the maneuvering thrusters fired, spinning the Deliverance around. Its aft section slammed into Davenport's bridge, tearing through shields and hull plating. Alarms blared as the Deliverance's own hull buckled from the impact. But Hastings was already moving. "Damage report later," he barked. "Security team with me. We're boarding that ship." As Hastings led the charge onto Davenport's vessel, Sorensen's fleet battled the elements on Andoria. They'd managed to evacuate thousands, but time was running out. "We can't save them all," Zara said, her voice thick with anguish as she watched her world burn. Sorensen gripped her shoulder. "We'll save as many as we can. That's all we can do." Suddenly, their comms crackled to life. "This is Admiral Vance. All Earth vessels, stand down immediately. The Andorians are to be eliminated. No exceptions." Sorensen's blood ran cold as she saw the massive dreadnoughts descending through the clouds, weapons primed and ready to obliterate everything in their path. Hastings' fist slammed against the comm panel. "Vance, you've gone too far. Stand down now, or I'll make you stand down." The Admiral's cold laughter crackled through the speakers. "You and what army, Hastings? Your ship is crippled, and my forces outnumber you 10-1. "Then I guess we'll have to make it count," Hastings muttered, cutting the transmission. He turned to his battered bridge crew. "All hands, prepare for emergency warp jump. We're getting these people out of here." Warning klaxons blared as the Deliverance's engines strained against their limits. The view screen filled with the looming bulk of Vance's Dreadnoughts, their weapon ports glowing with deadly energy. "Sir, warp drive is offline," Tanaka's voice rang out from engineering. "We're sitting ducks." Hastings gritted his teeth, watching as the enemy ships closed in. Just as all seemed lost, a barrage of phaser fire lanced out from behind them, striking Vance's lead vessels. "This is Commander Zara of the Andorian Defense Force," a familiar voice announced. "We've rallied what ships we could. Let's show these traitors what happens when they threaten our worlds." A ragtag fleet of Andorian and human vessels surged forward, engaging Vance's forces in a frenzied battle. Hastings seized the opportunity, ordering all power diverted to the transporters. "Beam every Andorian you can aboard," he commanded. "We're not leaving anyone behind." Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. The Deliverance shuddered under near-constant weapons fire as Hastings coordinated the evacuation efforts. Finally, as the last of the refugees were secured, Zara's voice cut through the chaos once more. "Captain, we've cleared you a path. Get our people to safety. We'll hold off Vance as long as we can." Hastings nodded grimly. "Understood, Commander. We'll be back for you. All hands, prepare for emergency warp jump." The Deliverance's engines roared to life, catapulting the ship into the safety of warp space. As the adrenaline of battle faded, Hastings surveyed the crowded bridge. Thousands of Andorian refugees filled every available space on the ship, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Dr. Sorensen approached, her expression grim. "Captain, we've saved as many as we could, but without a sustainable source of oxygen, these people won't survive long." Hastings' eyes narrowed. "Then we find that oxygen. Zara, you mentioned something about reserves being stolen?" The Andorian commander nodded, her antennae twitching with agitation. "Yes, vast quantities were siphoned off-world in the months leading up to the attack. We never discovered where they were taken." "Well, it's time we found out," Hastings declared. He turned to Sorensen. "Doctor, I need you to analyze every scrap of data we have. Find us a lead." Days passed as the Deliverance limped through space, its systems pushed to the limit by the overcrowded conditions. Finally, Sorensen burst onto the bridge, her eyes alight with excitement. "I've got it," she exclaimed. "The oxygen reserves were transported to a dwarf planet in an uncharted system. It's not far, but—" "But what?" Hastings prompted. Sorensen's expression sobered. "The system is littered with debris. Some kind of battle occurred there recently. We'll be flying into a potential war zone." Hastings set his jaw. "We don't have a choice. Plot a course, maximum warp." The Deliverance streaked through space, accompanied by a small fleet of support ships. As they approached the coordinates, the ship dropped out of warp, revealing a scene of devastation. The dwarf planet hung in space, surrounded by a swirling cloud of twisted metal and frozen corpses. Fragments of alien vessels, unlike anything they'd ever seen, drifted silently in the void. "My God," Sorensen whispered. "What happened here?" Before anyone could respond, proximity alarms blared. The debris field was moving, coalescing into deadly clusters that streaked towards the Deliverance and its escorts. "Evasive maneuvers," Hastings shouted. "All hands, brace for impact." The ship bucked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the onslaught of weaponized space junk. Through the chaos, sensors detected a massive structure on the planet's surface, the likely location of the oxygen reserves. Hastings made a split-second decision. "Prepare an away team. We're going down there." Minutes later, Hastings led a group including Sorensen and Zara through the airlock of a shuttlecraft. As they descended through the planet's thin atmosphere, the true scale of the alien construct became apparent. It dwarfed anything humanity or the Andorians had ever built. its architecture defying conventional understanding. The shuttle touched down on a desolate plain of ice and rock. Hastings stepped out, his breath catching in his throat as he surveyed the alien landscape. In the distance, the shattered remains of an encampment stood as a silent testament to the violence that had occurred here. "Stay alert," he warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with." As they approached the ruined camp, a grisly sight awaited them. The bodies of alien beings lay strewn about, their forms bizarrely inhuman. Many had been dissected, their internal organs exposed to the frigid air. Sorensen knelt beside one of the corpses, her face pale. These weren't combatants. They were scientists, researchers. Something, slaughtered them. Zara's antennae quivered. But why? And where are the oxygen reserves? A piercing shriek cut through the air, causing the team to instinctively duck for cover. In the sky above, a swarm of debris coalesced, forming into deadly projectiles that streaked towards their position. "Back to the shuttle," Hastings roared. "Move!" The away team sprinted across the barren landscape, chunks of alien metal exploding around them. They piled into the shuttle, Hastings practically throwing himself into the pilot's seat. As they rocketed back towards the Deliverance, Hastings' mind raced. They needed those oxygen reserves, but with the automated defenses active, they'd never reach them. Unless... "Tanaka," he barked into the comm, "I need you to reconfigure our warp drive. We're going to use it to clear a path through this minefield." "Sir?" Tanaka's voice was incredulous. "That's never been done before. The risks are less than certain death," Hastings cut her off. "Make it happen." The Deliverance's engines thrummed with power as Tanaka worked her magic. Hastings gripped the arms of his chair, watching as the swarm of debris grew ever closer. "Now!" he shouted. A burst of warp energy erupted from the ship, creating a ripple effect through space-time. The minefield detonated in a spectacular chain reaction, clearing a path to the planet's surface. For a moment, it seemed they had succeeded. Then alarms blared throughout the ship as systems began to fail. "Warp drive is offline," Tanaka reported. "We've suffered critical damage." As the Deliverance reeled, a new threat emerged from the dissipating debris field. A massive alien vessel, easily twice the size of Hastings' ship, powered up its weapon systems. "Hail them," Hastings ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of an alien being. Its eyes, cold and calculating, bore into Hastings with predatory intensity. "I am Major Zira," the alien declared, its voice a harsh rasp. "You have intruded upon territory claimed by the Drakari Imperium. Prepare to be boarded and processed." Hastings opened his mouth to respond, but Zara beat him to it. "Wait!" she cried out. "That voice! Tyla? Is that you?" The alien's eyes widened in shock, its composure slipping for just a moment. "Zara, how—" "No, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't have come here, sister." As tension crackled between the two ships, Hastings realized the stakes had just become far more complicated than he could have imagined. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, with an enigmatic alien force holding all the cards. Whatever came next would shape the course of history for generations to come. "Tyla?" Hastings repeated, his pupils dilating. "Commander Zara, explain." Before Zara could respond, Major Zira's voice crackled through the comm. "Enough! Surrender the oxygen reserves immediately or face annihilation." Hastings gripped his chair, squeezing hard. "We can't give up those reserves. The lives of thousands depend on them." The massive alien vessel loomed closer, its weapon ports glowing with almost unchecked energy. Hastings' mind raced, searching for options. "Sir," Zara said, her antennae twitching, "I have an idea. It's risky, but—" "At this point, I'm open to anything," Hastings replied. Zara outlined her plan quickly. Hastings nodded, his expression grim. "Do it." Moments later, the Deliverance's remaining oxygen reserves vented into space. The volatile gas ignited, creating a brilliant fireball that engulfed the view screen. "Now," Hastings shouted, "all ships concentrate fire on their primary shield generator." The human fleet unleashed a devastating barrage, their weapons finding purchase in the alien vessel's momentarily vulnerable defenses. Alarms blared as the Juggernaut's shields flickered and failed. On the bridge of the Deliverance, Dr. Sorensen's eyes widened as she studied her console. "Captain, I'm detecting a familiar energy signature within the alien ship. It's my sister, Tyla." Hastings turned to her, shock evident on his face. "Your sister? The one who was studying the oxygen reserves?" Sorensen nodded, her voice tight with emotion. "She's alive and she's a prisoner on that ship. We have to rescue her." As the battle raged around them, Hastings made a split-second decision. "Doctor, assemble an away team. We'll create a distraction while you infiltrate the Juggernaut." Minutes later, Sorensen led a small team through the alien vessel's twisting corridors. They navigated a maze of deadly traps and automated defenses, losing 2 team members to a sudden energy discharge. Finally, they reached a sealed laboratory. Through the reinforced viewport, Sorensen saw her sister hunched over a complex array of equipment. "Tyla!" she called out, her voice muffled by the thick barrier. Her sister looked up, eyes wide with surprise and fear. Before Sorensen could move to free her, a cold voice rang out behind them. "I must admit, I'm impressed you made it this far." Sorensen spun to see Major Zira flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. The alien commander's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "But your rescue attempt ends here," Zira continued. "Both Sorensen's sisters will now contribute to the glory of the Drakari Imperium." Back on the Deliverance, Hastings received word of the away team's capture. With options dwindling, he turned to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Barnes, prepare the hull charges. We're going to punch our way into that command center." The human strike team breached the Juggernaut's outer hull, only to find themselves caught in a carefully laid ambush. Zira's elite guard cut through their ranks with brutal efficiency. As his comrades fell around him, Lieutenant Barnes fought his way to a data terminal. With trembling hands, he initiated the upload of Tyla's research files to the Deliverance. "Captain," he gasped into his comm as enemy fire rained down around him. "The data is transmitting. Don't let our sacrifice be in vain." The transmission cut off abruptly as Barnes was overwhelmed. On the Deliverance's bridge, Hastings watched as his options evaporated one by one. With a heavy heart, he gave the order he'd hoped to avoid. "All hands abandon ship. Initiate warp core overload." As escape pods jettisoned from the dying vessel, the Deliverance's unstable core erupted in a blinding flash. The resulting shockwave tore through the Juggernaut's weakened shields, leaving it vulnerable. In that moment of chaos, Commander Zara's voice cut through the comm channels. "For Andoria!" Her crippled cruiser accelerated towards the breach, ramming into the alien vessel with devastating force. The combined detonations sent shockwaves rippling through space, destabilizing the massive Juggernaut. "All ships, fall back," Hastings ordered from the bridge of a support vessel. The ragtag fleet of human and Andorian ships limped away from the battle, leaving behind the wreckage of friend and foe alike. Days later, at a hidden outpost, the survivors of Hastings's fleet gathered to assess their losses. Dr. Sorensen was presumed captured or killed, along with Commander Zara and countless others. As Hastings stared out at the stars, wondering how they could possibly recover from this defeat, Dr. Evans burst into the room. "Captain," the scientist exclaimed, his eyes alight with excitement, "I've finished analyzing Tyla's data. You need to see this immediately." Hastings followed Evans to a cluttered lab where complex schematics filled every available screen. "It's revolutionary," Evans explained, gesturing wildly. "With these modifications, we can transform our hyperdrives into oxygen generation engines. We might have lost the reserves, but we've gained something far more valuable, the ability to create our own virtually unlimited supply." For the first time in days, Hastings felt a glimmer of hope. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but now they had a fighting chance. Hastings stared at the schematics, his mind racing with possibilities. This could change everything. "Precisely," Dr. Evans nodded, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "But we'll need resources far beyond what we have here to make it work." The captain's lips pursed. He knew what had to be done, even if it went against every instinct. We need to reach out to the Andorians. Hours later, Hastings stood before a makeshift council of human officers and Andorian refugees. The atmosphere was thick with tension as he outlined their desperate plan. "This is madness," growled Gruss, the deposed Andorian High Commander. His antennae twitched with nearly unleashed anger. "You expect us to simply hand over our remaining technology?" Hastings met his gaze unflinchingly. "I expect us both to do what's necessary for survival. Your people are dying just as surely as ours. This is our only chance." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Human and Andorian alike exchanged wary glances. Years of distrust and conflict, not easily forgotten. Gruss's eyes narrowed. "And what assurances do we have that you won't hoard this miracle oxygen for yourselves?" "None," Hastings replied bluntly. "Just as we have no guarantee you won't turn on us the moment you have what you need. But we're out of options and out of time." Silence fell over the room. The weight of their situation pressed down on every soul present. Finally, Gruss spoke. "Very well, we will assist in this endeavor. But make no mistake, human, this alliance is born of necessity, not trust." Hastings nodded grimly. "Understood. Let's get to work." The following days saw a flurry of activity unlike anything the outpost had ever known. Human technicians labored alongside Andorian engineers, pooling their knowledge and resources under Dr. Evans's guidance. In the crowded shipyards, the skeleton of a massive hyperdrive took shape. Sparks flew as welding torches fused alien alloys with human steel. The air hummed with the constant whine of power tools and shouted instructions in multiple languages. Lieutenant Commander Tanaka prowled the perimeter, her security teams on high alert. Despite the shared goal, old hatred simmered just beneath the surface. More than once, she was forced to break up scuffles between human and Andorian workers. "Keep your people in line," she warned Gruss after one particularly nasty incident. "We can't afford any delays." The Andorian commander's antennae flattened against his skull. "Perhaps you should direct that warning to your own kind, Lieutenant. We are not the only ones struggling with this arrangement." As the days stretched into weeks, progress was made, but at a cost. Exhaustion etched itself into every face. Tempers frayed as resources dwindled and deadlines loomed. Then came the alarm that changed everything. Hastings burst onto the bridge of his flagship, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Report!" "Long-range sensors have detected a massive vessel on an intercept course," his tactical officer replied, voice tight with tension. "Sir, it's the Juggernaut." The captain's blood ran cold. "How long?" "At current speeds, less than 48 hours. Hastings' mind raced. They were so close, but not close enough. Not with Zira bearing down on them. He keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is the captain. We've run out of time. I want every available person working on those hyperdrives. We finish this now, or we don't finish at all." As the outpost erupted into frenzied activity, Hastings turned to his chief of security. "Tanaka, I need you to assemble a team. We're going after our people." Her eyes widened. "Sir?" "Dr. Sorensen and Commander Zara are still aboard that ship. We can't leave them behind." He paused, his expression grim. "And we can't let Zira get her hands on that oxygen tech. One way or another, this ends now." Tanaka nodded sharply. "I'll take our best. We'll get them out, sir." As she hurried off to prepare, Hastings gazed out at the bustling shipyards. Human and Andorian alike worked with singular purpose, their differences forgotten in the face of annihilation. He allowed himself a moment of pride before the reality of their situation crashed back down. They had one shot at this, one chance to save not just their people, but their entire worlds. The comm crackled to life. "Captain," Dr. Evans's voice rang out, "we're ready for the final power-up sequence. You'd better get down here." Hastings took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Whatever came next would determine the fate of two civilizations. He only hoped they were ready for it. Hastings sprinted into the cavernous hangar bay, his boots echoing on the metal deck plates. The massive hyperdrive loomed before him, a towering construct of alien alloys and human ingenuity. Dr. Evans stood at its base, surrounded by a swarm of technicians making final adjustments. "Status report," Hastings barked, his eyes scanning the organized chaos around him. Evans looked up from his console, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "We're as ready as we'll ever be, Captain, but I can't guarantee." A violent tremor shook the outpost, cutting off the scientist's words. Klaxons blared as emergency lights bathed the hangar in a crimson glow. "Sir!" Lieutenant Commander Tanaka's voice crackled through Hastings's comm. "The Juggernaut has entered weapons range. They're firing." Hastings hardened his eyes. "Initiate launch sequence. All ships, prepare for immediate departure." The hangar erupted into frenzied activity. Crews scrambled to their stations as the massive bay doors slowly ground open, revealing the star-studded void beyond. The hyperdrive hummed to life, its core pulsing with otherworldly energy. "Captain," Evans shouted over the din, "we haven't had time for proper shielding. The radiation levels—" "We don't have a choice," Hastings cut him off. "It's now or never." As the fleet lifted off, the outpost behind them erupted in a series of devastating explosions. Hastings watched from the bridge of his flagship as the Juggernaut's weapons tore through their former sanctuary. "All ships, maximum warp," he ordered. "Set course for Earth." The stars stretched into brilliant streaks as the ragtag fleet of human and Andorian vessels surged forward, the experimental hyperdrive propelling them faster than any ship had traveled before. Days compressed into mere hours as they hurtled through space. Hastings paced the bridge, acutely aware of the precious time ticking away. Every second brought them closer to Earth, and closer to the radiation limits their hastily constructed shielding could withstand. As they dropped out of warp on the outskirts of the Sol system, a collective gasp rippled through the bridge crew. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that chilled Hastings to his core. Earth, once a vibrant blue marble, now hung before them as a smoldering, angry red orb. Vast swaths of the planet were obscured by roiling clouds of toxic gas and ash. Firestorms raged across entire continents, visible even from orbit. "My God," someone whispered. Hastings steeled himself against the wave of despair threatening to overwhelm him. "We knew it would be bad," he said, his voice steady. "Now let's fix it. Hail Admiral Vance at Alpha Centauri." The familiar face of Admiral Vance appeared on screen, his expression grim but determined. "Captain Hastings, I see you've brought us a miracle." "Let's hope it's enough, sir," Hastings replied. "We need to coordinate global deployment immediately." Vance nodded sharply. "I've already begun positioning our remaining orbital platforms. We'll use them to guide your ships into optimal formation." As Vance's image faded, replaced by a tactical overlay of Earth, Hastings turned to his crew. "This is it, people. Everything we've fought for comes down to the next few hours. Let's make them count." The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity as officers relayed orders and coordinated with the other ships in the fleet. Hastings watched as the Dreadnoughts, each equipped with one of the experimental hyperdrives, maneuvered into position around the dying planet. "All ships report ready, sir," his XO announced. Hastings took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of this moment. "Initiate hyperdrive activation sequence. Now." A brilliant latticework of energy beams connected the ships, forming a shimmering web that enveloped the Earth. The hyperdrives hummed in unison, their otherworldly song reverberating through space itself. On the main view screen, readouts flashed as sensors detected the first tendrils of oxygen seeping into the upper atmosphere. It was working. For days, then weeks, the fleet maintained their formation, pouring life-giving air into Earth's ravaged skies. Hastings watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation as the angry red of the planet's surface gradually gave way to more familiar hues of blue and green. But even as they celebrated this first victory, a new threat emerged. Dr. Evans burst onto the bridge, his face pale with alarm. "Captain," he gasped, "we have a problem. The methane reserves under the polar ice caps. They're destabilizing. If we don't act fast, all our work will be for nothing." Hastings' mind raced, weighing impossible choices. "What are our options?" Evans hesitated, then spoke the words that would haunt Hastings for years to come. We could try a targeted gamma detonation, burn off the methane before it can reach critical levels. But the fallout would render large areas uninhabitable, Hastings finished, his voice hollow. The weight of command pressed down on him like a physical force. He thought of the billions struggling to survive on the surface below, of the sacrifices made to reach this point. With a heavy heart, he made his decision. "Prepare the strike force," he ordered, "and may God forgive us for what we're about to do." Hastings stared at the tactical display, his teeth clenched as he watched the gamma strike unfold. Brilliant flashes erupted across Earth's polar regions, searing away the methane threat but leaving vast swaths of scorched Earth in their wake. The bridge fell silent, the weight of their actions settling heavily upon every soul present. Months passed in a blur of rebuilding efforts and cautious hope. Earth's atmosphere stabilized, the planet's familiar blue hue slowly returning. But the cost had been astronomical, and the scars, both physical and psychological, would take generations to heal. It was during this fragile period of recovery that long-range sensors detected an anomaly at the edge of the solar system. Hastings stood on the bridge of the Deliverance, peering intently at the main view screen as a battered lifeboat limped into view. "Is it?" he began, hardly daring to hope. His tactical officer nodded, eyes wide. "Confirmed, sir. It's Dr. Sorensen's transponder." Within hours, the lifeboat was retrieved and brought aboard. Hastings rushed to the hangar bay, arriving just as the airlock cycled open. Dr. Sorensen stumbled out, gaunt and haunted, but alive. Hastings' elation quickly faded as he realized Commander Zara was nowhere to be seen. Sorensen's debriefing painted a grim picture. She recounted months of terror, hunted relentlessly by a vengeful Zira across the cosmic void. Her voice broke as she described Zara's final, heroic sacrifice. "He ruptured the hull," Sorensen whispered, her hands shaking. "Used the venting air to buy us time. I activated the emergency hyperspace slingshot, but Zara, he was pulled into space." Hastings placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own grief threatening to overwhelm him. "He saved your life, Doctor, and quite possibly all of ours." Dr. Evans burst into the room, clutching a data pad. "Captain, you need to see this." He pulled up a series of complex calculations and sensor readings. The singularity that captured Zira, it's growing exponentially, and its trajectory. Hastings felt the blood drain from his face as he studied the projection. "How long?" 20 years, Evans replied grimly. "Maybe less." Within days, Hastings found himself addressing a tense gathering of human and Andorian leaders. The chamber buzzed with hardly restrained fear and anger as he laid out the situation. "We face a threat unlike any we've encountered," Hastings declared. "Zira's species appears to be nomadic oxygen harvesters, capable of inducing artificial singularities for interstellar travel, and now they may be returning in force." Admiral Vance hit his fist on the table. "We have no military strength left. Our only option is to fortify what we have, build planetary shields, improve our stealth technology." "And cower in fear?" Chancellor Terral, the new Andorian leader, stood abruptly. "We refuse to await our doom like cornered animals." The debate raged for hours, with Hastings advocating for a bold, preemptive strike using experimental slipstream technology. In the end, his plan won by the narrowest of margins. Weeks later, Hastings stood in the shadow of the half-constructed slipstream craft. He turned to face Lieutenant Riker, noting the determined set of the young officer's jaw. "She's yours now," Hastings said, handing over the command codes. "I wish I could go with you, but my place is here." Riker nodded solemnly. "We'll get it done, sir. Whatever it takes." As the final preparations were made, Dr. Sorensen approached Riker. She held out a gleaming dagger, its hilt bearing the insignia of Andorian Special Forces. "This was Zara's," she said softly. "I'd like it to go with you, to remind us all what we're fighting for." Riker accepted the blade with reverence, understanding the weight of its significance. As he turned to board the ship, the assembled crowd fell silent. Human and Andorian alike watched as the brave volunteers prepared to plunge into the unknown, carrying with them the last, desperate hope of two civilizations.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.